We're going to move into the panel session now, very grandly called the Summit Measurement Colloquium. I'm going to introduce the moderator and the speakers, starting first with Paul Holmes, CEO of the Holmes Group, as your session moderator. And panel, please come on stage. Giselle Bodie, Chief Executive, Salience Insight; Francis Ingham, Executive Director, ECO and Director General, PRCA; Jeremy Thompson, Chief Executive, Gorkana Group, and AMEC Chair-elect; and Greg and Dave and Kevin and Matt complete the panel.
I wanted to start with something that David touched on in terms of commitment to consistent standards, because I think that's an interesting point. As long as I've been writing about this business, I've had people tell me that PR people have never figured out an answer to the measurement question, almost always with the implication that advertising people have. I've never entirely believed that, and I think the reason that people do believe it is because the advertising industry as a whole has sort of rallied round a single consistent standard, no matter how wrong-headed that standard might be, whereas we continue to come up with new proprietary ideas, whether it's relevance or authenticity gaps or corporate character or a trust barometer, that we want to emphasize over a standard solution. And so I wondered first of all how important you thought it was for the PR industry to come up with a single definitive measure. And second of all, why that's been so difficult to achieve and whether it will continue to be so.
Yeah, we're fighting years of not having the first strike initiative here, you know. We have been following those who had set the pace with their own forms of measurement, and it's an enormous machine. Omnicom alone places $22 billion worth of news media, or paid media every year. And of course, they're justifying that with various measures that only gain in their relevance and importance. Secondly, the rating agencies are also complicit in this. We simply do not have the machinery in place to do this. It's going to require us to come together and win over CMOs one at a time to declare new forms of measurement that, frankly, the ad world has not and could not think of. And I think we're starting to circle around those today.
Anyone else have a point of view?
I think we need to think about what is the standardization and what is it for, because in public relations, it's such a broad profession dealing with so many different audiences. So public relations, you can deal with customers, you can deal with employees, you can deal with government. So the question mark is, do you need a standardized measure for every one of those audiences? Do you need measures for the channels to reach those audiences? So there's so many different things you could be measuring, and therefore there's so many different standards. But I can tell you one thing, I would be very happy to comply with a standard that was around media evaluation and impose it on my agency if there was a global standard that everybody subscribed to.
Okay.
If I perhaps could talk from the industry perspective, of course, the standard, the single measure, has been the sort of the holy grail, but it isn't. And I think we just have to put it to one side. There's no 42 Hitchhiker's Guide to the answer of measurement. It's standards for sure. And actually all three speakers talked about standards in the plural. None of them claimed they had the standard. And of course we've heard about the way the advertising industry works. We are not it. We are the experts. You are the experts in PR. We help you prove your worth and look forward. And I think there was a lot of talk about looking forward using the research. So no, there isn't going to be a single standard.
I agree with all of that, actually. I mean, I don't think there will be a single standard. I think there can be common expectations and principles. So last year, AMEC, ECO, and the PRCA in Madrid launched the PR Professionals Guide to Measurement and Evaluation. And over the last year, we've worked together, the three organisations, to launch today, in half an hour, through the PRCA and ECO and AMEC, a common expectations, a kite mark of excellence in evaluation and measurement that all of our agency and in-house members in the PRCA will be expected to undertake, and which we will push out through the 1,800 agencies in the 29 countries in ECO, and that gets launched this morning. So I think we can have principles and expectations. What we can't have is this holy grail, and if we search for it, we'll just be wasting our time, frankly.
Okay, so Kevin, I'm kind of interested in your response to that. You touched on the complexity, and that obviously is something that I've always heard about PR, that there are so many different objectives. But you'd also focused during your presentation on this idea of recommendation and something very close to Net Promoter Score, for example. And it seems to me that that is, in fact, a metric that can be applied to all of those things. If you're looking for an employee communications program, it can be measured by the willingness of your employees to recommend you. Same thing in the consumer space, in the political space. Is there a reason why you don't see that as not quite a silver bullet, but at least as something that is universally applicable?
It's a good question, and you have exposed my lack of thinking about it.
Sorry.
No, I think, one of the things we're looking at now, for example, that I don't think has been examined very much around Net Promoter Score, but comes out of the Triple G research, is that the score that clients may get on the Net Promoter Scale is all very well, but what it hides is the number of active people pro and the number of people actively against you. And in many ways, what this is showing us is companies are getting complacent because they're doing nothing about the active antis, and they think that Net Promoter misguides them around, well, we're doing okay. So I wouldn't advocate that as the only measure. But
No, to be clear, I'm not necessarily suggesting Net Promoter Score as much as I am saying that nearly everything that PR people set out to do can, I think, in theory, be measured by saying our objective is to create more advocates for our clients and to reduce the number of critics of our clients.
I think that's true, but the thing that I always work with clients is the idea that actually what we're trying to do is change behaviors. So we're always looking for more customers buying more, financiers providing more money, employees working smarter, working harder. So actually the name of the game is behavior change. So how you get to measuring behavioral intent is the real issue for me. And how do all of the channels enable you and give you predictors to potential future behavior? That, for me, is the holy grail.
Anybody who hasn't spoken up yet want to?
Yes, but I'd just like to say I think that the search for this sort of magic number is ill-conceived. Having said that, the industry has come a long way. When I first joined, or at least when I first tried to join AMEC, I was actually rebuffed the first time because I was a media monitoring company. And we simply didn't know what we were doing, and everyone had their sort of secret magic, and you weren't allowed in. I mean, how the world has changed. I think that was 7 or 8 years ago, not that long ago. I think that we are obliged to find a common language that everybody understands. We still talk about media intelligence. We talk about analysis, measurement, insight. I'm not sure everybody's understanding of all those things is the same. I know the guy at customs at JFK Airport has no idea what media intelligence is, and my mission is to educate the world. But I think if we start with language, start with principles, start with frameworks, and work our way all the way down to metrics, then we'll start to get somewhere. And we have come a long way. We have many of those things. But the insight study suggests that not enough people understand them. So our job has to be to educate people around the principles, around the frameworks.
Okay, so I hear two things consistently, particularly about marketing clients in our industry. The first thing is that marketers want some evidence of ROI, which seems perfectly logical and almost obvious to me. At the same time, all of those people who raised their hands earlier when they were asked about AVE and whether clients still wanted AVE, I am 90% certain, without doing a poll of the audience, that those requests came from marketers. And the reason that marketers like AVE is because they like to be able to compare the achievement of public relations to other disciplines. And what worries me here is that we are, by not having a universal standard of our own, not advocating for a standard of our own, allowing ourselves still to be defined by a metric that was designed for and shows another industry in a better light. And so I wonder whether by eschewing this idea of a holy grail, and from a sort of analytic point of view, I understand why we do it, but I worry that by saying it can't be done, we are not allowing another industry to set standards for us. I wonder, Matt or Greg, do you come across that still from your marketing clients, and how do you respond?
Maybe I can talk about the client side, and Greg can talk about what we're doing to try and respond. Not to throw you in it, mate. But yeah, all the time. I kind of, it doesn't bother me because it's just, we just do it and then we move on. There's a really big idea that we're working on for a client right now, which requires a 7-figure investment, and anything that we have or our industry has to date is not going to make them write that check on production without trying to have something that they understand in their language. And we know that that's not how we're going to measure the success of the campaign. We know that's not how we're going to write our award entry. We know that's not really going to be the metric of its success, but we've got to put a figure in there at the moment in order to get someone at board level to say, yeah, I'm going to spend 7 figures on this. Now that just gets us through a process. We use PRCA's guidelines, we use Amex guidelines and everything else, and but I think 90% is about bang on, Paul, of our clients from the marketing communications discipline will still say, so can you give me an idea? Or I know it's not important, but my boss likes to see it, or the CFO would like to see it. It's still there, but I don't think it's as important as probably it was. But Greg, what are we doing to try and counter that?
Well, I think the point that Paul made at the beginning, which is that advertising has done a very good job of rallying around a core set of lies about how they, about how to measure the effectiveness of advertising, really has put us at a disadvantage, not just in terms of time. I mean, we're decades behind the curve, but also in terms of our the diversity of opinion, both among clients and agencies, about how best to prove what it is we have to do. I think the way to begin to the way to begin to address that, and there is a ton of pressure to sort of conform to advertising industry standards, is to offer up not silver bullet answers, but processes and methodologies of our own that get to questions that are bigger than how much media did you buy, or how much, how many people did you reach, and get to the broader question of how are people exposed to what we do different in attitude and behavior, intent, compared with people unexposed, and how does that play for advertising, direct marketing, and many other disciplines. In other words, I think we have to find ways to elevate a process that will work and that can be applied both to paid, earned, owned, and shared media.
There is an elephant in the room which I think we need to address, which is the idea that actually clients need to be prepared to spend more money on evaluation for us to be able to do it, because either we as agencies have to accept that liability, and there's all sorts of reasons why perhaps we should, but it is a significant liability and cost that would help us to prove our case. But really, we should be embedding it in the client campaigns more and getting the clients to accept it more and carry the cost. So I think a question I'd put out to the industry is, what creative ways could we co-create measurements in campaigns for our clients where each of us takes some measure of risk, but which then would generate positive returns for us that both achieve the measurement issue, but also get us clients and work, because that is the name of the game, isn't it?
Right. So I don't mean to be standing here making the case that abandoning intellectual integrity has worked so well for the ad industry that we should try it too, particularly not in front of this audience. But I do wonder, in an era when it's clear to me that there are metrics around engagement, around advocacy, around recommendation that are much more powerful across the board than traditional reach and frequency metrics, for example, that we ought to be trying to present something that, that not only we, but the ad industry should be measured against. I mean, in an ideal world, the ad industry would be being held accountable for engagement and advocacy, which are things, frankly, that I believe we do better. But I want to come to your point, Kevin, because I do think there's something interesting going on right now, which is that PR agencies, that certainly the firms represented on the stage right now, are all trying to move up the value chain in terms of the kind of services that they provide to clients and the way they get compensated. Naturally, there's a huge change going on in our industry right now, faster than anything that I've ever seen before, in terms of the kind of people that we're recruiting and the kind of thinking that we're delivering to clients. And what really worries me is that as we upskill in big agents, well, in agencies generally across the board, we are also adding people who cost more. We are therefore adding people who have to be billed at a higher rate. We therefore have to prove to clients that what we're delivering with those higher quality people is a higher value service than what the quote-unquote PR agency down the street is delivering with, and I don't mean to be as dismissive as this is going to sound, half a dozen ex-journalists and a couple of people with PR degrees. And I wonder whether we're able to prove that we're adding that kind of value and getting compensated for it, and how we're proving that. Kevin, that's a issue that you've thought a lot about, so I'll start with you.
It is, but I think it's fair to say that in my agency, for example, if I'm working with CEOs and we're dealing with sometimes what I would describe as existential issues, crises of such enormous proportion that the client could go under if you don't sort it out properly. They have no question about the value that you provide when you're around that decision-making table, and they're prepared to pay whatever it takes for your advice in those moments. But when I've got a junior press officer in my company trying to prove their worth to the client, you start getting really a lot more tricky and a lot more demanding, and usually because it's in service of a marketing director, PR in service of marketing. But when we are PR in service of reputation or PR in service of employee engagement, there are different measures that matter differently to those internal clients. So I guess the issue for us is which client in the client organization are we really serving? Is it marketing? Is it strategy? Is it employee? Is it HR? Is it supply? So again, you'll find that causes you to value yourself and therefore charge differently at different places.
Sorry,
Can
Dave?
I just suggest that
Sure.
the media intelligence industry has exactly the same challenge. We are, the good news is that we are getting into the C-suite with data and insights that people now really value. But clearly we're having to invest in technology and people to deliver that. But frankly, our industry, the PR industry, the media intelligence industry serving it, is evolving. And some of the kind of the grunt work that typically more junior, more lowly paid, more less qualified people, frankly, would have done in the past, technology is now doing. So we can deploy that investment into people who have real analytical capabilities, who can help the C-suite make informed decisions.
I think it's linking on from Jeremy's point. Matt, you mentioned that, okay, the guys on the ground get it, measurement is necessary, we don't need the AVEs, but my boss needs something. We have to, as an industry, I really feel strongly that as an industry, combined PR with measurement, have to demystify So standards have a part to play. But demystify for every level of the organization, not just going into the chief executive who understands absolutely the price of reputation and the loss of it. It's enabling people at all levels, in PR agencies, in-house, to articulate what measurement brings, and we are definitely not doing a good enough job at that. And we complain that, oh yeah, they're asking for AVEs because their boss does. Well, give them the arguments in simple enough terms, but in robust terms. And I think we are making progress. And I think, you know, over the last 7-10 years, as Jeremy mentions, we've made an enormous amount of progress. But that argument has still to be made.
Dave.
Paul, I think it was more than 20 years ago, I heard an industry leader say, public relations must seize the agenda. I thought it was a bold statement that was aspirational and stretched us far beyond what we thought we could do. We thought we were there at the table to serve and to work around the edges, and our focus was largely on communications process measures. No one really came to us saying flat out, we want this outcome. We want this tangible outcome. And of course, you know, a lot of us on this stage and in this room and not in this room have put an enormous amount of time and energy into building our firms so that we could deliver the outcome, that we could seize the agenda, and therefore be responsible for the outcome. Did they buy the product? Did they pass the law? Were employees more able to engender customer loyalty? And because we were more complete in our ability to address these, process measures became very important, don't get me wrong, shareability, engagement, and so forth. But what did they do? And this is where Kevin and others have been touching on. What did they do? And you asked a second question. Assuming we could drive behavioral outcomes, would we get paid for it? And the answer is we are just breaking that ground now. It's one of the few upsides that we see in dealing with procurement, which is just beating us over the head with our own self-imposed hourly regime. But when I can say that you gave us, you know, $150,000, and guess what? You know, we've created a trend among the most influential mommy bloggers to try Greek children's yogurt. I mean, then we can trot that up to the CMO, trot that up to the CEO, and I dare say even the CCO when they have those same kinds of issues, and express what we do, not in process terms, which I think is 90% of our debate here, but in the terms of outcomes.
You had a point to make, and then I'm going to throw it open to the floor for questions.
I think it's important to be critical and to recognise our weaknesses, but also we ought to be reasonably positive about this. I mean, the communications directors I speak with in membership of the PRCA take evaluation and measurement really seriously, and much more so than in previous years. Our agency members take it far more seriously than they used to. The growth of AMEC in itself is visible evidence of how the industries are working together and have moved on and developed. I see AVEs mentioned far less frequently in the award entries that I judge and that I see in other capacities. So there has been a great deal of progress, and there's a lot more to be done, but we really shouldn't meet every year at this event and beat ourselves up about this, because we are actually going in the right way, and we should recognise that fact.
Okay. Anyone from the audience have...
Hi, Elaine Phillips here from the UK government. You talked a bit about some using common language in the industry. Jeremy talked about that. That's really, I think, really important. And you also talked and hit on sort of informing and educating members of the C-suite so that it's the message is really being brought home. some of the challenges that I think many of us face is about that education piece. So how can we use this insight, and have you got any tips around this, to sort of, I guess, do that education, but also to persuade some colleagues and the C-suite that this is really valuable and that this insight is exactly what we should be using to inform that decision making?
You know, I think that's a really important and good question. It's really not the C-suite that we have to persuade. They're smart and they get it. It is this level of communications manager, sort of midway up the chain, that historically I think public relations has been in a kind of conspiracy of silence with, which is, please don't ask us what this is worth. Here's a big fat clipbook, and if you don't ask us, we won't tell you. We don't know, and so that is an environment in which the kind of infection of advertising equivalency can thrive. It's like a petri dish of nutrients for that bad idea. I think we have to remove. I think in the act of removing bad ways of measuring from the thought process, we have to introduce good ways, right? We have to, education becomes a process of substituting something that is equally compelling, equally valuable, and doesn't put their kind of mid-level careers in jeopardy, right? I mean, they're hedging risk against the idea that I may do a program someday that my boss won't like because I can't prove that it's working. And that's the world in which AVEs and large and fat clipbooks, thrive. I think we have to be really, really smart about introducing new ideas. And the good news is that, in the world of, online research and many, many other technologies, social conversation monitoring, many other things, we can do this in fast, affordable ways. So it doesn't necessarily require 6 months and $1 million. It might be, 3 weeks and $5,000 or something like that.
AMEC has actually run 2 webinars on the subject of education around measurement with the support of Booz Allen Hamilton and Gorkana so far this year. The first in January, I think, had 1,500 registrations. 700 people turned up, 650 I think were on for the full hour. So I think we scored reasonably highly on the relevancy index. What was really interesting is we could have gone on for 3 hours. The number of questions we were getting through on the Twitter feed and directly through the webinar screens. But the overriding themes coming through were that 75% of those on the call were dissatisfied with their current measurement programs. And most of them were asking for simplicity and transparency, and the rest were saying, how do I convince the CMO or CFO, because they want a number. We ran a follow-up in May, which again I think had about 700 registrations, and that was more about putting principles into practice. But I think the theme is that people want help. There is a lot of interest out there, but people want us to help them make it clear, make it simple, make it affordable, and tell them how to sell it internally. So I think it's up to us over the course of the next 3 days to work that out, or 2 days even.
And there's a really good argument to be made that today the person with the best data will come up with the best insight. The person with the best insight will get to drive the strategy. And to that point earlier, the PR people have better access to more data today than they ever did in the past. There was a question in front here.
Thanks, Paul. Michael Ziviani, Precise Value Australia. Don't we already have the common currency in terms of outcomes regarding brand health tracking or continuous tracking to reputation, and the links that thereby occur by varying activity in the communication space, be it advertising, PR, events, social, whatever, and the uplifts in that brand which provide a way to value?
There are lots of good outcomes tracking methodologies. What we don't do very often is make the specific link between exposure to what we do and changes in those outcomes. So we can do kind of high-level correlation tracking over long periods of time, but what we almost never ask is either via proxies in social media or directly through consumer surveys is, were you exposed to this idea? And how are people exposed to this idea materially different in attitude or behavior from people unexposed, right? And then it becomes a science experiment. So we have good endpoint measurement, but what we don't have is always the linkage to exposure.
One of the seminal moments in my career was when I worked at the Atomic Energy Authority, and I was put in charge, I still don't know how or why, but I was put in charge of quality for the whole of the authority. And I learned more in 5 years about measurement by being in charge of quality than I learned in 35 years in public relations. And the single thought that I took away from that experience was that continuous improvement is about benchmarking where you are, it's about tracking your progress, and it's about gaining insight into how you can improve and then measuring it as you go forward. And each of those is really different. But every experience I've ever had around this concept of measurement is that the greatest value is placed on insight. Every discussion I've ever had with any client around here's how we did and here was the value of what we delivered, but you know what, we saw this and it says that you ought to be doing that. The conversation moves very quickly away from evaluation to what does that mean for us and what do we need to do. So I think the theme of your conference is absolutely spot on. It's about how do we drive more insight into what we do, because that's where the value lies.
Rob.
Yeah, Rob Flaherty with Ketchum. A question for Kevin and any of the panelists. I really liked your research into intangible assets. I think in addition to relevance and reputation, the study of relationships as an intangible asset is incredibly important. I've wanted to write a book for many years called Relationship Capital to make sure that it's regarded as one of the intangible assets on the balance sheet. So the question is, have you seen situations in M&A situations, major acquisition situations, in which the relationship capital of a company was valued as a way to get a much higher value for the company?
I actually have, and I've seen an understanding of that relationship quotient deter mergers, because it was only when they examined the state of the relationships of the company they were trying to acquire that they realized how much trouble that company was in, and therefore how much of a challenge it would be, and therefore decided not to go ahead with it. So absolutely. And I must tell you that all the research I did for my second book shows me that there are a lot of people moving into the space of measuring these intangible assets, and are going to steal the game from us, because they own the concept of relationship capital, of reputational capital. The Bains, the McKinseys, they're all in that space now, and it's because they want to get to the strategic table.
And what a shame if, our last name is Relations. What a shame if we don't own relationship capital.
That's why I think my company's got the best name of all, Good Relations, because it's exactly what we're about. And I can't, I bless Tony Good, who founded the company all those years ago, because it's absolutely what I think our industry is about.
This is kind of related. Every year, we at the PRCA publish benchmarking data, and we ask clients and agencies for their perspectives on different elements of how they work together. And every year, our agencies come back and say that their relationship with a client is the main determinant of success and how long the client will stay with them. And every year, the in-house team comes back and says it is the least important element, and that evaluation and creativity are the most important element. And we need to have a degree of honesty and realization about where we simply don't agree on what is important. And given some guys are paying the check and some guys are receiving the check, I know which group has to change.
Okay. I have been told that I have to cut off the questioning at this point. This is a very disciplined, as you might expect, conference, clearly determined to run on time. The only thing that I'll say in response to that is, if we all agree that relationship capital is really important and one of the things that we ought to be measuring, I find it slightly bizarre that our industry continues to run away from the term public relations and towards a much smaller concept of communications. But since this is the Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communications, that may not be a good point to make in front of this particular group. In any case, thank you very much indeed to our panelists. Thank you to you for your questions. If you didn't get to ask a question, I'm sure everybody will be around for a little while at the coffee break, and you can buttonhole them and annoy them then. Thank you very much.